Hey Spartans, Josh here. Just wanted to give you a heads up coming into these episodes in the month of May. Just like last year, we're doing a full dedication to the month of May to what nationally they call Mental Health Awareness Month. We're trying to change it into Brain Health Awareness Month. That being said, these episodes will be sensitive in nature. I do want you to lean in though. Last year I asked you if you were in a dark spot, potentially not to listen or tune out. I'm actually going to ask the opposite this time, that you lean in. I am here for you. If you need to talk, please shoot me a DM. If you're struggling right now, if you're in a dark spot, I want you to know that I am here at any time. And these messages, these stories will help. They are going to give you seeds of hope this month. And for those of you doing well, I encourage you to donate this month, time or money or treasures of your choosing to this national crisis. That being said, enjoy these wonderful episodes with some amazing human beings that have truly inspiring stories. Alison, you lost your best friend and husband to suicide. Can you please take us back to where it all began?
On that day, April 28th, 21, it was like a bomb blew up in my house. And that's like the only way I could describe it. Not knowing where to go, not knowing who to talk to, seeing my kids and like everybody's traumatized. I can't get away from this situation. I know that I can get over this situation, and the only way out is through. My husband was a 21-year military vet. He was a hero in so many different ways, but he was not somebody who you would think was suffering from any like post-traumatic experiences. He was telling me, I think there's something wrong with me, like I'm really afraid, and he was. He ended up dying by suicide. Somehow, we have to find a way to gain more than we've lost. And everyone, my kids, we all went, yes. So I was intentional about gaining things, reconnecting closer to my children, developing different kinds of relationships, understanding grief in a different way so I could help people more. Whether you're thinking thoughts about suicide or you just feel real dark or you've lost someone, I just want you to know that you can be okay. I know this land. I have conquered it. And even if you don't have evidence of that, I hope that I can be your evidence.
This is Sparta!
Welcome back to Spartan Leadership. I'm your host, Josh Kosnick. Hey, Spartans, you're doing a great job sharing. We've now reached Europe and Australia. I can't be more excited that our impact is spreading across the world. Please continue to like, share, subscribe, whatever you got to do on all these platforms and channels to support the mission of impacting and inspiring people's lives. And this episode today is going to be amazing because I got my good friend Alison on. Alison is a psychotherapist, entrepreneur, mother of four, and suicide loss survivor. In all of her grace, please join me in bright sunshine yellow that she's wearing today in her beautiful new office, Alison Lager to the show.
Yay! I want to thank you so much for having me on this show. It is a complete honor. And I am thrilled to be able to give whatever I can to your listeners. And I wore this color intentionally to speak about triumph, and that no matter how dark things get, I want to be a message of hope, that I can hold a space of hope for your listeners. And that's my intention.
Oh, that's so cool, because once they hear your story, I know that they will get a lot of hope from today. And your story's not an easy one to hear. But if anyone listening in today has a single ounce of doubt in their mind that they are not strong enough to carry on, please give Alison's journey of grit a true listen here and buckle in. Alison, you lost your best friend and husband to suicide. Can you please take us back to kind of where it all began, and then we'll journey and kind of question and answer from there?
Sure. I'd be unhappy to.
Yes.
So I was going to say I'd be happy to. But what I do want to say to anyone who's listening is that you do not have to be concerned about me sharing anything too graphic, or that's going to be everything that I'm going to share is a message that you can see that you will be okay, whether you're thinking thoughts about suicide, or you just feel real dark, or you've lost someone. I just want you to know that my message is about that you can be okay. And even if you don't have evidence of that, I hope that I can be your evidence. So basically what happened, and it's interesting, it's April now, but it was April 28th, 2021. My husband, who was truly my very best friend and authentically my best friend, he was my go-to, my run-to, my belly laugh, like at night, every night in bed, we laughed like hysterically over the dumbest things. Like he was truly my person. He was like the mother I never had because I had like a hard childhood. He really was. He was like mothering. He was masculine. He was just everything I could ever dream of. And I never know when I'm going to cry. So I may or I may not. But anyhow, the reason I bring that up, I'm not just memorializing him because he's gone, because I don't even believe in that. I can tell you the annoying things he did too, which I still think were cute, even though. But anyhow, the point is that on that day, April 28th, 21, it was like a bomb blew up in my house. And that's like the only way I could describe it. In my business, my everything that I knew was, I couldn't run away from myself. That's what it feels like. You want to shake it away and you can't. And it's a reality that you're experiencing suddenly, right? So my husband was a 21-year military vet. He was incredible. He was like a hero in so many different ways, but he was not somebody who you would think was suffering from any like post-traumatic experiences. You'd see him here or there, like flinch, like at fireworks, but he was open about it. I would ask him, I'm like, how come you're so normal? He's like, I have no idea, because he's fought in every war. Yeah. And so anyhow, you speed up to around 6 weeks before he died. He had like a sudden onset of, I just started seeing him being really super anxious. I started watching but not knowing. You see, sometimes, and that's what I hope I can get across to people, is that, bring some awareness as, to notice certain things. I own counseling centers for 30 years. We save people's lives all the time. I'm aware I know what the signs of suicide are. And I learned that, when it's very close to you, you may not see it. So basically, he was telling me, I think there's something wrong with me. Like, I'm really afraid. And he was, and we were talking about, it was just getting more, he was having he was feeling terrorized inside of his body. So what ended up happening was he ended up dying by suicide. He did put a gun in his mouth and shoot himself. So the reason I say that one thing is because what happened was, I have had a lot of different tragedy in my life throughout my young life. And my life has been a life of not victimhood. I wouldn't even come close to that. I am so honored to have been given the call that I have to have these counseling centers, to be able to help people, because when you go into a dark place that you don't think you can get out of, and somehow with God, I believe in God. I think without faith, it's possible. I don't want people to think that if you don't have,
faith.
God, if you don't have faith, that it would be like an issue. When all of this happened, what I want to say is that about day 3. So now we are it was literally like a bomb in my house. It's just it's like I visualized it as just rubble everywhere, smoke, fire, like not knowing where to go, not knowing who to talk to, seeing my kids, and like everybody's traumatized, right? And thinking, I can't get away from this situation. I know that I can get over this situation. I know I can get through it. And the only way out is through. So I just decided to go left foot, right foot, left foot, right foot. And just, if there's a little fire here, I'll stop. I'll, recollect myself. And then what happened about day 3 is we were all in like huddled, like scared animals in my house. And I just came to me. I was like, you know what, guys, somehow, some way, we have to find a way to gain more than we've lost. And that was like the decision. And everyone, my kids, we all went, yes. And I said, can you agree to that? And they all said, yes. And so I would keep a journal next to my bed and I would jot down anything that I gained. It wouldn't matter what it was. And, you know, periodically, you know, how we do, I parallel this to how you know, manage a business. It sounds weird, but like write down your wins. So, you know, after like a year, I said, I'm not going to suffer on that day. I'm going to write down everything I've gained from that day forward. So I was intentional about gaining things, about reconnecting closer to my children, about developing different kinds of relationships, about understanding grief in a different way so I could help people more, you know, and then in the midst of that, feeling anger, rage, you know, doing things maybe, you know, internally I shouldn't do. But that's the reason I say this, is because I want people to understand, whoever's suffering with something like this, that to understand that not every day is pretty. You know, I'm coming on here in a bright shirt, you know, I mean, this morning I was crying. So I want you to understand that it's a healing is not linear, that it's, you know, if you look at it like a graph, you know, in the beginning, it's like this, like, it's just every day is crazy. But then, you know, then there's like a really big day of pain, and then it can go down and it gets like, you know, and then it goes on, you know, so never feel like, oh my God, I'm going all the way back, because you're not. So what I want to share about this story is that at that night, or possibly it was the night after, someone got in touch with me, and they were from Arete. And I'm going to say his name. It's Mark St. George. And Mark came to me and he said, I want to speak for my brother, CJ. And that man, when I tell you, he got me through it. I didn't know him. He's in Canada. And him and his wife, I didn't know him. He's an Arete. He's like, I just want to tell you that I know what my brother's feeling, because he suffers from post-traumatic things. And he just started telling me, he goes, he spoke, I could hear it. He was like, he understood him. And I started to notice, and then I interviewed Kayla Steckline on my podcast, and I heard what she said about her husband who died by suicide.
That was the wife of the pastor, correct?
Yes. And she wrote the book, Fear Gone Wild and Building Back Beautiful. And her and I talked about the suicide mind. And here I am, an expert in mental health. And just 2 months before that, we had the honor, a beautiful honor of saving someone's life, you know, of being able to, you know, stop someone who was about to, they had the whole plan done. And they called up, and I spoke to the wife, and she said, you know, what should I do? You know, my husband seems so depressed. I said, bring him in. And then the point that helped that man was that we were direct with him. He was directly asked, you know, do you want to die today? Because people don't do that. You know, people are afraid to bring it up because they think that will make them do it, but it's not true. You know, so, and he said yes, and he had planned everything. He was doing it that day. So there's
Kevin Hines, I think sorry to cut you off.
It's okay.
Directly to that point, Kevin Hines, when we had him on last year, because this is his field of work now after he survived his own suicide attempt. I think I'll get these 3 questions right. Have you thought about killing yourself? Mm-hmm. Have you thought about or made a plan to kill yourself? And do you have the means to kill yourself? And and I was, at first when I heard the questions, and I wish that I knew those questions before my father-in-law took his own life, but it kind of struck me to my core, right? Like, you're going to literally ask someone, have you thought about killing yourself? Right? Because killing yourself is final, as you and I both know. And, right. So saying those words out loud is like, it's
very
scary.
important.
But it's also very important, like you said, like you have to call a spade in this situation and be direct with the person. Have you thought about killing yourself? Have you made a plan to kill yourself? And do you have the means to kill yourself? And so you're saying it 3 times in different ways to get them to verbalize how far down the path they are.
Well, can I add a few to that? Because that's like a suicide assessment. So it's called like suicidal ideation, plan, or intent. So every therapist knows that, but the thing about it is the way he described it is really cool because it escalates with each question. So the ideation is the thoughts. You know, are you having any suicidal thoughts, right? And then when somebody has a plan, now each thing escalates. But what I always like to ask is when I hear that they have a plan, you also ask, first of all, you find out what the plan is. You have to know what the plan is. It's very important because if the plan is to shoot yourself, then you want to know, do they have access to a gun? Yeah. So you find out how serious, what imminent threat it is. And then there's another piece to it that's really important. Does the person drink? Do they do drugs? You know, any of those things, because any risk that's already there is heightened by any mind or mood altering drug. And it could also be a prescription drug that nobody's really knowing about, like Xanax or Klonopin or any kind of a drug that maybe they'll say, no, I'm not. But you know that they're prescribed something. So you'd ask, so there's something about asking a lot of wise questions. And then so that's like in the moment. I'm not sure if I should dig into this too. Do you want me to?
Well, I think it might be helpful because you have an expertise, right? Like, so I want to give people tools in this episode, I think, because we have your big brain here with us, not only from your personal experience, but your professional experience, to give us some tools, because if we could save that life, just by, let's try and do that.
What I'd like to say about that's really important. There's like an acute situation where somebody could be suicidal in that moment. And then there's prevention that's long, like it's long term. So there's a way to I think part of how we can be valuable here is we can also teach people long term how to create less suicide. So one of the ways to create less suicide long term is in relationship to yourself and to others would be to be awake and aware in the now. You know, people being more fully engaged and emotionally understanding their own emotional state and regulating it. But then also you can start at the age of birth, with a baby, and developing a relationship with anyone that you're with or any loved one where there is never, you understand the importance of they need to be seen and understood. And so do I. So being able to see a person and them knowing that they can come to you with anything and you will not be shocked, you will not overreact, you will not criticize. These things are built over time. They're built in families, they're built in relationships, and we're not really taught that. So we're taught to react. So it's being emotionally sober. The real thing is teaching people that emotions, how to emotionally regulate. So if people can begin to learn that early, and, I was mentioning to someone, it was Alicia, about when you were dealing with a child or an adolescent, there's certain ages of adolescence that are more at risk, because of their brain development. And also young people do not have the evidence of triumph, of overcoming, of resilience, of that this too shall pass. They haven't developed that. Yeah. So they need to learn that. So that's important. That is why I'm here to tell you that you can overcome and triumph over incredible things. And I've spoken to so many widows, And what can happen in your neurologically is that when you have a trauma, it's almost like a spasm. So it's like a thing that happens in your brain that you can have. Dr. Joe Dispenza discusses this, one long emotional response where people become the widow. People become the person who lost.
Claim the identity.
Yes. And what I have tried to do is I notice when I say I am a widow, anything after I am identifies us, right? So I don't like even using the word I survived. No, I triumph. Like that's on our sign outside, triumphant change. There is nothing that we cannot triumph over, because I do believe that God sees pain very differently than we do. And
He turns it into purpose.
Oh, yeah.
Our pain is a purpose in his regard. And guys, I want to put this out there because she doesn't have time to go into it today. Because Alison and I have had the opportunity to share a stage together. I know just a fraction of her story before her husband's suicide. What she's overcome in her life is just incredible. So she's speaking from a wholehearted truth. That again, we can't get into her entire story together in our time today, but I just wanted to put that out there for everyone as you continue to share.
Yeah. And it's like, it's the utilization. So like when something lands in your lap, right? You're like, oh my God, how did this get here? Right. I mean, I was neglected and abused and all these other things. I was, all these really like bad things happened in my life. Right. However, I learned through the process, and that's why it's a gift, because I believe that this was something that was meant to be in my life. It is my training. I have 8 years of college, and I had a supernatural experience when I was writing my book. Do you want me to share it, or is it too woo-woo for the...
No. Let's do it.
I did.
There's nothing too woo-woo for us here.
Yeah, me too. So I was writing my book, and I'm all about like, this is not happening to me, this is happening for me. And I was at the pinnacle of my life. I'm writing this book, I'm at my last edit, I'm at this beautiful mountain house lake, by myself, finishing the last edit. My husband's still alive. I have a successful multi-location, multi-million-dollar business. I'm like doing so well and happy, genuinely happy in my life. And I lost all the content of my book. And I'm like, all right. And I'm like, and I remember thinking, this is a luxury problem. Okay. And then I'm like, okay, so what am I learning from this? What am I learning from this? And then I have this experience. It was like a being or whatever, as I'm getting a massage. And I heard, I believe it was God Almighty, Alison, you have hidden your talent for far too long. Tell the truth. Tell them where your real education is. And I want you to do that. So my real and you know what your real education is. What is it? So my real education is the climb out of neglect, the climb out of abuse, sexual abuse, the climb out of living in chaos, the climb out of, I did not mention that I was a victim of suicide previously and finding the body of somebody else before, when I was in my early 20s. I was in a murder trial. Like, I know this, why am I telling you this? The only reason I'm telling you this is because the climb, it's the, okay, what am I going to do? Am I going to take this and utilize it? Or am I going to take this and have one long emotional response as a victim of circumstance, of tragedy? And we have a choice. There's crossroads at every point. I remember my pastor saying to me, Alison, you've reached a crossroad. And one thing I know about you is you're going to choose the right fork. You're going to go in the right direction. He didn't even tell me which way to go. I knew that, so then it's like, okay. So then it's like, okay, what is this particular thing squeezing me into, molding me into a person? And what I love about it, and I have to say, I love it. I'm smiling because I do. It is so exciting to have an opportunity when someone walks in the door, like let's say that I was hospitalized for an eating disorder. That's another thing. So to have somebody who feels like they're never going to get better, that their life is over, that they'll never succeed. And I can sit with them and say, I know exactly what that is. And I can sit, I visualize myself, I put a stake in the ground, I go right in there with them and I sit there and I know this land. I have conquered it. You know, I have authority over where you are right now. So
personally and professionally.
Yeah. But to know
and
it.
The personal one hits harder though.
That's what the whole world, and this is kind of a message I hope I get across, because this is what would prevent suicide. If people knew, if you see someone, to understand someone is to love them. To feel understood is like supernatural because it's truth. They talk about it being the highest vibration is truth. It takes two to tell the truth. When someone doesn't feel ashamed about where they are, when someone can just say, I'm terrified, because the suicide brain is basically fear gone wild. It's a different brain. And they have a person that they can share that with who's not going to react. So if someone ever feels suicidal or wants to hurt themselves, if you have any inkling that someone is very, very, very anxious and they feel, you can kind of see, but always ask. You don't even have to ask about the suicide. Look at them in the eye and try to really understand without an agenda, without fixing it. It's scary to think that if someone wants to hurt themselves, kill themselves, that you're not going to do something immediately to fix it. But if you're with them, if you let them talk and you help them separate, like I'll say, do you want your body to die or do you want your pain to end? That's a hard question to ask, right?
But it's the right one.
Yeah. But then,
because they need to recognize that too.
Yes. And also you can find out, do they see future? Because that's a very, we have these assessments, but those extra questions, like if you could, where would you see yourself in a month? If they can't see future, then that's more imminent, right? And everything goes out the window if someone wants to hurt themselves, kill themselves, everything goes out the window. So that
I have a direct, I have a direct experience with that, Alison, because Alison and I got to bond at an Arate event, and by bond in this event was the fact that we both could commiserate that we're both lost dearly loved ones to suicide, and we got to cry together and hug each other and whatever and all that good stuff. But 2 months before my father-in-law's suicide, I'm in the laundry room with him for 2 hours and behind closed door. And the reason we were behind a closed door in the laundry room at his house, which is obviously a weird spot to be having a conversation, was because he didn't want my wife or his wife to hear what he was saying. And so to that response of being able to see the future, I didn't know how bad he was. I knew that stress and financial and business, there was this thing going on because someone was essentially running a Ponzi scheme on him. And I'm in there trying to solve a business problem because that was my nature and that's what I knew. And I didn't know that it wasn't a business problem that he was trying to share with me. And he couldn't see the future because I'm sitting there going like, you got to get down there. You got to inspect what you expect. You got to see this person face to face and see where the money's going and see where the trailers are and all that. Like, I'm trying to solve the business problem, but that's not what he was trying to convey to me. And so as suicide survivors, we all have that guilt of should have done more, should have seen more, should have recognized more, all those different thoughts that go through our head that aren't necessarily productive. And I just wanted to chime in on that because he couldn't see the future in that instant. He couldn't see in front of his face. That's how bad it was. And this was at Christmas time, which should have been a more joyful time with all the grandkids. It was the only time he ever met my son. And so that piece of it, that question of being able to see the future, I wanted to give a real life example that Tom couldn't in that instant, and that should have been a huge red flag to me had I known this information that Alison is giving us today. So I just wanted to stop there and make sure that people really recognize how powerful that is.
I want to thank you so much for sharing that. And it, it makes me realize what is very important to share here is that these real life experiences, like what you just described, this is something that I'm always telling the therapists, and because it's very natural, people want to solve the problem, that's being presented, and it's an act of love to want to do that. And kind of the message I want to get across, and I think it's also a masculine thing because it's natural for a man to want to solve a problem, which is a good thing. It's not a bad thing. It's a kind thing to do. And very often we wouldn't naturally just think that someone's going to take their life. That wouldn't come naturally to us. So that's why it's important. And I do believe that this happened for you and for the wide variety of people that that, his death continues to do more. And we have to remember that, like, people don't just, their death is powerful. So we don't want to so what I want to just, about what you just said is that, like, when someone doesn't have hope, like a situation feels way too big for them, one of the reasons that it does is because of their programming that's literally in their body. Because, like, when we're very little, from 0 to 7 years old, we were in a theta brainwave and we were in a hypnotic state. And we have all these programs inside of us that then are triggered for the rest of our life if we're not aware of them. So even in that moment, your father-in-law could have been even like feeling like, I can't go to that person. I mean, we don't know, because of some terrified part inside of them. So there's this like is it okay if I give like a scripture and a quote?
No, please do.
So one of the things I think that it's like a broad, like, foundational prevention for suicide is that we want to always go deeper with human beings. And, the scripture that says, do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. I've always thought of that as like, oh, don't listen to bad music or whatever, stuff like that. Or, but what I've come to understand on another level of that scripture is, do not be conformed to the world that you've been born into, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. And there's this quote by Alvin Toffler that says, the illiterate of the 21st century will not be those who cannot read and write. It will be those who cannot learn. That's being conformed. That's our first stage. Unlearn and learn again. So the commitment as any human being, even with our children, because we're adapting and making conclusions when we're very little about all these different situations. And very often it's fear-based. And when someone gets to that point where they're in a suicide mind, I just want to mention something else. Sugar, poor diet, all of these things that a lot of people are not considering. A sugared out person, like, I noticed over the last 6 weeks, like, my husband always loved sugar, but I believe, like, had so much sugar in his body. He was barely eating. He's just eating sugar. And that makes a person depressed and crazy. Yes.
Yep.
So these are things you could just miss. Are they drinking water? Right? And the language that's happening inside of their brain probably matches, like, scared times in childhood, or all these different things that people are not aware of, and they're not going to tell you because they feel crazy, because it feels young and scary. So that's why Kayla wrote, like, Fear Gone Wild. I've had the unfortunate experience, but fortunate experience of having my mind do that. And the reason that I love that I had my mind do it, I think it was God's gift, because I couldn't understand it without knowing it and feeling it myself. But I actually had a suicide brain for a few moments, or a little bit more than a few moments. And it actually, once a decision's made, it feels good. You finally feel, it's totally irrational. You feel like you found relief. You feel like the chatter is going to stop. So it's very helpful to listen to a person without any agenda, no conclusions, no solutions. That can come later. Because when they can get a lot of it out, I'm terrified. I don't know what to do. Blah, blah, blah. Like, just say it. It's like almost
therapeutic.
It really is. And there's this thing that happens between human beings that's healing, even if they're in the most horrifying place, is that if someone hears them and doesn't judge them and accepts them and does nothing, just is there, holds space for them, they're going to feel some relief. Then you can get them the help they need, but you can stop something in the midst of it, right? That's important to do. So I have so many things that I could say, but I don't know where our time is. So
well, I got a couple of questions for you.
Sure.
Well, I got a lot of questions, but one to go backwards, and then I want to spend the rest of our time going forwards. You're a therapist, you're an expert in this, and I know you had guilt and shame and judgment from others around your husband's suicide, because of all people, like, you should have been the one to be able to help him, right? Yeah. So talk through how you got through that, because that's such an added layer that the rest of us, the survivors, didn't have to deal with.
Yeah, I'm so glad you asked that, even though it hurts. I can tell you, over most of the things, that has been the hardest part of this, is to, I could cry over it. It's just to be misunderstood, it's just incredible, so it makes me cry, but I understand it. And one of the things, like, I talked with different widows about it, very often people's reaction, because they don't know what to do. When you don't have an answer, it's very, very scary. And that's part of the growth and the healing out of when someone dies by suicide, is that you have to be able to come to terms with, somewhere inside of you, being willing to not know, being willing to move on with your life with not knowing all the answers, or possibly going in and reframing what you believe or any of the guilt, and possibly even writing a story that would make more sense for you, instead of being guilty about it. And there's ways to do that. Like, you can go in and do that in your mind. But with very often, other people need to know why. And very often, it's even with anything, even with like alcoholism, people want to blame the person closest to the person, like, what did you do or not do? Yeah. How did you hurt them? And, what I want to say to anyone, because and I'm going to address this to anyone, I don't know why I want to say it, but if anyone's hearing this, like, even if, sometimes people will have a breakup or something, and then somebody commits suicide, they die by suicide, excuse me. So then it feels like it's their fault the rest of their life. But the truth is that people do things, people hurt one another, people have arguments, things happen. That doesn't mean that you caused something to happen, So it's anyone who's hearing this, I just want you to understand that we go through normal life without tragedies happening. But when we go through normal life, and the normal things that happen, even just if you're like a little annoyed at someone and then they die, that becomes, like, illuminated, and it becomes frozen in time. So that's part of the healing, is you want to unfreeze that and say that this is part of an abundant life and experience of relating, right? So yeah, in the community, I own counseling centers. Everyone knew my husband. He did the construction and everything. Like, he was, hey, CJ, what's the paint color? You know what I mean? And he was so good-natured. Everybody loved him. And I found out while I was in my office, I'm wailing. It's a counseling center. Like, I'm like screaming. And like, the people here, it was really hard. And I made a decision, like, no matter what, I'm not going to lie. I'm going to tell the truth. It was hard for me to do, because it's like, how do I admit that this happened in my own house when this is all I do? But I didn't care, like, because, and I believe that it's a message. Like, it's like, I'm not going to be ashamed of it. And and I have to, and very often when you lose someone, I've experienced this before, and I just want anyone who hears this, I want you to know this. Try not to let this take you down. The facts are, when someone dies in your life, no matter how they die, very, very often you lose people, friends, whatever. And you don't want to get bitter.
Sometimes.
Yeah, because they don't know what to do with you. They don't know what to do with your pain. They don't know how to act around you. So that did happen to me, but it didn't happen to me. I really understand it. But people actually just felt almost suspicious of me, which I've never really outwardly publicly talked about it, because I don't want to like blame anyone. But that was probably the hardest part for me, that I felt like I had to explain, well, what happened? What were you doing? How come we didn't know? Why didn't you tell us? Like that kind of thing. Like, what did you do? And I'm thinking, God, I don't know. Like, I'm running it over in my own mind. Like, what happened? How did this happen? And just to be put in that position when you're already questioning yourself,
grieving.
It's just feels like that was the part that was like, you're already so down. That was the hardest. I do have to say, but I do want to, can I tell people one more thing that was just really good, that helped me?
Please.
I had also incredible people. My daughter-in-law's mother did this crazy thing. She was like, let me find out how I can help Alison. She asked my daughter-in-law, she's like, what is the one way I can help Alison? And not flowers, not anything. And she lived far away, Georgia. And she's like, I want to know. And she's like, I don't know. Alison keeps talking about CJ's truck. She just wants it. And nobody can drive. And she's like, I'm going to figure out how to get it. This woman by herself, like, traveled. She like was in like this remote area. She got his truck, like, by herself. She got it. It was just crazy. It took her hours and flying, and I didn't even know. And she brought that home to me. And she's just incredible. So then we're all sitting on the couch. And I just never forget this. And I'm like, oh my God, American Idol's on. I'm never going to watch American Idol again. He had a favorite. And she just so beautifully, she said, she's a beautiful woman. She said, when my father died, she said, I lost my mother. She goes, my mom never did any of the things she ever did. She just died. She was alive, but she was dead. And I heard her. And I was like, okay, I have to take back American Idol. So all of these joint things that you do with this person, we will want to hide from them. CJ and I always rode on the boardwalk at the beach, 6 a.m. Sunday mornings. It was our thing, 17 miles. We'd laugh. He'd have music on. Like, we loved it. We did it every Sunday. And I don't know, Josh, I was like, you know what? I'm going on that boardwalk. I'm not going to lose my beach. The beach is still alive. The boardwalk is alive. I'm alive. So I'm not going to associate, because human beings associate neurologically these events. I still hurt when I see American Idol. I'm like, I watched it last night. I'm like, oh my God, that growly voice. He would have loved this person. But then I say, energy doesn't die. He's more alive now than ever. And we have to know that.
In that moment.
Yes. I've had a lot of like very incredible supernatural experiences that I will spare you. But
well, I appreciate you sharing that, because it's so real. And my mother-in-law experienced, family turning on her, and it's been hard to watch from afar, because you love this person so much and see them already going through so much pain, and yet the people that were closest to her, in some senses, they really stepped up, and others, they really fell apart. And it's just hard to see them go through more pain when people turn their back. But on the other side of that is a gift that shows you who's real in your life and who's not.
I think that even very real people do that because they don't know what to do.
They're protecting themselves.
Yeah. And I think that when you don't know why something happened, you're desperate so blame can feel it's very bad for you, but it can feel soothing to you. And I do think that, that understand, like I just in regard to your mother-in-law, blame, that is also kind of related to what I was talking about, like almost like emotional sobriety and emotional drunkenness. The sign of mental health is being able to regulate your emotional state, your state of being. And that's kind of what I had to learn over these different experiences, right? So now you have people who are hit with this tragedy, and emotional drunkenness is a natural reaction to trauma. So what you'll do is there's an event, and that event, immediately, most people react and they blame outward, they focus outward. So they try to heal or fix an internal crisis with an external solution, right? So that's one of the ways to help someone who is suicidal too. So, and even someone who's reacting to a suicide, is that to be able to go inward and say, how can I fix an internal problem? Like, this happened. What is this saying about me? So then you go in, I'm guilty. Whatever it is that what am I concluding internally? What is this making me think about myself? And if you ask wise questions, then the external event doesn't have that power over you anymore, right? The whole world is blaming and reacting.
Always. All right, so we got about 10 minutes or so. I want to go think forward because we got your expertise here. We have an epidemic in this country with young people dying by suicide. Mm-hmm. And by the way, everyone, Alison corrected herself once. Both of us have been very purposeful about saying dying by suicide versus committing suicide. And it's important because when there's an attachment to the word commit, that's very negative. And so when you say commit, it's typically attached to crime or rape or murder or something very, very bad. And so we're trying to break the stigma of brain health and brain illness and suicide. So that's why we're purposeful about using the words died by suicide. Mm-hmm. So I just want to point that out quick. That wasn't my question. My question is, so this epidemic around children essentially dying by suicide. Now, I know there's stuff that, I have some major pain points with how the government handled COVID and locking everyone down in isolation. We know how bad that is for people, especially our youth. But what can you give for parents for tools to help them raise their kids strong, resilient, and hopefully avoiding the most painful thing a parent could ever experience?
Yeah. So what I would say as a foundational structure to begin as early as, birth is that you want to create a relationship initially. I'll talk about if someone is suicidal, but create a relationship ongoing. This also prevents sexual abuse. It prevents things like bullying. It prevents all of the kinds of things that can happen to a child, to an adolescent, or direction that they can go down that's dangerous for them. So the very first thing to do is you want to build a structure within your family that you are the person that they can go to no matter what. So that goes back to being non-reactive, being able to hear what they say. And if you have to chew your arm off, you do not do the correcting, the teaching, the shock by whatever they tell you. And it starts young, yes, I'm the one who threw the lamp across the room. Now, the first thing, we may want to react, but if you can begin to demonstrate, because children look to us for our emotional cues. Every child, every adolescent that comes into our counseling centers, typically a parent is saying, fix them. And it's because the child is communicating and emotionally reacting based on the emotional cues they've gotten somewhere else. And, we can all say it. We see our kids do the same thing we do. Just own it. It's okay. We all screw up. But what you want to do is create an atmosphere that when you go to listen to someone, even a spouse, it doesn't matter who it is, you go with no agenda. And the only intent is to understand. we need to slow down, because as parents, we have a sense of urgency to fix. But if we wait to fix, you always have time to fix. You have always time to help, but you give the child an opportunity. So like, let's say they want to go punch someone in the face. So they're like, this person did this to me. And you're like, you're like, okay, so what, oh my gosh, yes. Tell me, what was that like? Yeah. Just, yeah. Wow. Tell me more, just like that. And then they say, and then you're like, so what do you think would be the best way to go? You just ask them, and they don't know yet. So they might go, I'm going to go punch them. And you can go, well, that's an option, because it is, but we don't react. And they say, so with that option, so what do you, if you look at that, like, let's say 3 hours after that, what would that look like? How do you think that would be for you? And even if they say it would feel good, say, oh, like, what would it be like at the end of the night? Or, can you see, what would it be like without like scolding? It's amazing. They will come up with, they're like, yeah, that probably wouldn't work. I've done this with so many kids. And they'll tell you like this horrible thing, like, I'm going to go do this. And you're like, yeah. And then you say, well, and then they say, do you have other, what are some other options? And it's amazing, because in their little hearts, they usually know, unless they're raised, differently. So then this is a foundational thing that you're doing. So with teenagers, what I want to say is that there's certain ages they are trying on things that we don't like, because they need to individuate from us. So in order for them to individuate, sometimes it looks messy, different color hair or whatever. And the more they're rebelling might be because we're not allowing this kind of sense of individuation in a healthy, non-rebellious way. So these things just add, if they're not getting along at home, or they're not being understood, right? It's very, very hard to understand someone you don't understand. So you want to enter into the conversation with that as your only intention, because even if you don't agree, if you can understand the feeling underneath it, you're going to have access to that child. You will have much more access and more influence. So it's a building of this. If it gets to the point where, because people, adolescents will cut, and they become addicted to cutting. They don't necessarily always, that's not necessarily a suicidal behavior, even though it looks like it. It can be, but it's not always. So I'm just throwing that out there, because a lot of parents are like panicking, and they're like, whatever, and they're reacting, and then the kid reacts, and then it becomes fighting, and then it can build into more. So to answer your question, it's a building over time of connection, of understanding, and teaching, almost like, I'm present. You would be surprised what 5 minutes of direct contact does for another human being. 5 minutes is a while.
Undivided attention.
Yes. And without your own opinion. And
you're building trust and communication in that first example you were given. And you're teaching them to be a scientist of themselves. And like, the question I was thinking of in my head is, yes, that's an option. What do you think will happen next? Yeah,
that's it. 2 hours.
And like, help them think through, what do you think will happen next? Because an option coming back was, that person might punch, they could come with the answer, that person might punch me back. Or that I might get in trouble. And they could actually come to the conclusion for themselves. And that's what you're trying to do, is not give them the conclusion, but have them come to a positive resolution themselves.
Because we want to build something in them that they can think through a very difficult experience without reacting impulsively, right? Because, right? And also teaching them how to manage and regulate their emotions, because, also being aware of this, a big thing. Our society has taught children to identify themselves with a mental illness. That's why I don't much talk about like mental health. I say we are a movement, and you're like, we're about stopping symptoms, and then we step on the gas. Like, we can help you with the symptoms, but then how do we help you create a life that you want? And I think that we stop in mental health at the alleviation of symptoms. through big pharma or behavioral changes. We know psychocybernetics, like the set point that people have in their body, that they're going to return. If you just change the behavior, the internal, whatever that is, returns. So we want to get to the heart of the human to help them and not feel, we're so afraid of other people's emotions that it's really because we can't handle them. Usually with children, I always tell parents that, like, we want to make this better. What is the reason you want this fixed so quickly? What is the reason? They'll be, because I love them. I'm like, but does it have anything to do with the way you feel? Can you go through this and help them process this and not have an answer yet so that they get better? So that, this is not to alleviate our feelings, because being a parent is not that easy. It's like, we're training them. We're not punishing them for life, right?
Too many parents, to your last point there, I was thinking about, they're thinking about judgment of themselves. They're thinking about, what are other people going to think about me, instead of, no, focus on your child. Forget what everyone else thinks that aren't going to matter anyhow. You got to focus on, what does your child need in this moment? We got too many snowplow parents out there as it is, plowing every problem out of their kid's way instead of helping the child deal with the problems themselves. So I think you did a really good job answering that.
I got to just tell you one thing. Oh,
what's it? Go ahead.
Can I just say it? My son, I was yelling at my kids. They were all young, and I'm not a yeller, but I was. And my son said to me, he was like 8. He's like, Mom, I know you're really not yelling at us. I know that you're yelling at yourself. And I'm like, you know what? Honestly, Luke, you're 100% right. I am yelling at myself because I'm thinking that what is wrong with me as a parent that these kids are acting like this? I was yelling at myself. Most parents are yelling at themselves.
Did that 8-year-old turn into a therapist as well?
Oh, he's like a neuroscientist, doctor, whole thing. Science, psychologist,
right there.
Neuropsychologist.
Yeah, smart little dude you got right there. So that's awesome. All right, so last question. I usually end each podcast with, what's an unpopular belief you hold to be true that most others would disagree with? For this month, I changed it to, what is a commonly held misconception about suicide that you wish could be permanently dispelled?
Oh God, there's so many. Okay, that it can happen, that, I'll give you one, that it's a non-courageous act, that it's a chicken's act.
Selfish.
What do they say? Yeah. It's a selfish act. That's what they say.
Yeah.
So what I know from actually having the feeling and the experience of it, it is a takeover. It is a literal takeover of your mind. And the person who's about to do that actually believes that, most people, not everyone, they believe that they are helping. It'll be better for others if they're not there. They believe it alleviates a whole wide situation, and they are not. I know my husband wasn't selfish. He was a hero. I know who he was as a man. He used to say that about people. So what I do know is that there is a suicide brain, and I don't want this to frighten people, but I want you to be aware of yourself. And when you start to feel periods of anxiety, you want to make sure that you don't get into a place where it takes over, because if you're not talking to someone, if you're not being open, if you don't have a person who you can just be real with, the inner workings of our mind, once they get taken hold by toxicity.
A hostile takeover. Yeah.
It really is a hostile takeover. It really is. I think it's spiritual. And I think that the mind is taken over. So our mind judges. Yes.
I got a great analogy from Tom Farley, who is Chris Farley's brother.
Oh.
So Chris Farley is a local Madison, Wisconsin hero, comedian, actor to everyone else. But the Farley family here is well ingrained in Madison, Wisconsin, and they're all funny, by the way. Tom's become a friend, and he was on the show last year for the month of May. And he gave the example of, it's like your mind is in this burning building, and it's trapped. You're trapped. except then all of a sudden this door appears. And this door, the only way out that you see to save yourself is suicide.
Yes.
And that's the hostile takeover that you're describing.
Mm-hmm. And you just need your mind silenced.
Yeah.
Silence. Yes.
And to know that there's hope.
Yes. And it's not personal. If the person thought of you in that moment, that's what makes it not selfish, because they can't. They're embedded in a fire, like you said, like fear gone wild. Yeah.
Yeah.
They wouldn't do it if they thought of you.
No, they wouldn't. No. And I can speak from Tom's behalf because I know that because of how much he loved his family.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
He was in that burning fire.
Yes.
His mind was.
Mm-hmm.
So that being said, thank you for being vulnerable and sharing your story today and your expertise. We're going to have a lot of impact and save some lives with this episode. I know that. Where can people follow you, find you, or if they want to work with you, how can they go about doing that?
They can find me on Instagram or really any platform with Lager Counseling Services, or just lagercounseling.com. It's lager like the beer, Lager. And also Alison Answers, Alison with 1 L, Mission Awake. It's my podcast. It's my mission to awaken people to how they're automated, which takes them to places like suicide.
Awesome. Well, everybody, you know what to do. Follow her, follow the podcast, share this episode, please, so that Alison and I can continue our mission of helping save lives and prevent death by suicide. You know what to do. Share this far and wide. Remember, Spartans, the good and great are the enemies of possible. Lead like a Spartan today.